Hi folks, HR Funk here. With a classic revolver review, what I have with me here today is a mid-1970s manufacturer Smith & Wesson Model 60 Chief Special revolver. And this is a revolver with which I have some history. And in this video, I'm going to tell you about this revolver because it is a Chief Special in every sense, as you'll hear. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the original owner of this revolver. I'll tell you about some of the history of the Chief Special revolvers in general and the Model 60s in particular. And by the way, if you tuned into this video hoping to see mag dump after mag dump with a semi-auto and hear a steel target ringing like an old-fashioned fire alarm, you're probably going to be disappointed. But if you want to learn something about a classic wheel gun, stick around. You might just hear something you like. We'll start this review of the Smith & Wesson Model 60 with the way you would have brought it home from the store in 1975, which was about the year this revolver was manufactured. At that time, Smith & Wesson used a simple cardboard box, and on the end is a handwritten label. How about that? Not printed out on anything, simply stuck on there and someone filled it out with a pen. Inside, the revolver itself is wrapped in Smith & Wesson's own specially treated paper. And I'm not sure how necessary it was for a stainless steel revolver, but there is the revolver itself. And inside, we still have the paperwork. Actually, the old instruction manual. There's some other paperwork in there on Smith & Wesson ammunition, something in there for Smith & Wesson knives, holsters, all of the paperwork that would have come along with this back in the mid-1970s. Here's our first up-close look at the Model 60, and as I said, this is a Chief Special in every sense because it was originally owned by my first police chief, who was a great guy, and he was what I'll call an, I hate to say old-fashioned, maybe I should say a traditional police officer. And everything he did would probably not be by the book, at least according to today's book. But for his era in law enforcement, and he started his career back in the mid-1950s, he always did what he thought was right by his conscience and his community, and he tried to do what was right for his officers and his department. And I thoroughly enjoyed working for him. I was very fortunate because I had not seen him in a number of years. But I found out a few years ago he was actually in a nursing home close to where I was working when I was a chief of police. And at the time that I worked for him, the last thing I ever thought I would do in my life is work as a chief of police. But I was able to stop by and visit with him, and it was wonderful to see him again. And we had a great conversation, and unfortunately he passed away shortly after that. The chief sold this revolver to another officer in the department where I worked at the time, and eventually that officer sold this to me, which is how it came into my possession. Years later, I ended up giving this to my father as a Father's Day present, and my father passed away just a couple of weeks ago, and my brother found this revolver and gave it back to me. So that is why the revolver and this video are kind of special to me, and I hope you all enjoy it too. And here is a look at the starboard side of the Model 60. And it seemed like when I started working in that first police department, everyone there had a Model 60 revolver that they used for off-duty purposes, except me. And my need for an off-duty firearm is what set up the chain of events that led to me purchasing this from the officer that I mentioned a few moments ago. Back during the 1980s, and I started in that department in March of 1989. That was right after I got out of the Marine Corps. And I think it speaks to how prolific these Chief Special revolvers were at the time that, as I said, virtually everyone in my department, except me, had one. And I think whether it's the Model 60 or the earlier blued version, which is known as the Model 36 these days, were probably among the most popular, if not the most popular, off-duty firearms for police officers, probably for decades, going back to the 1950s. And the Model 36, at that time known simply as the Chief Special, was introduced in 1950, and they were extremely popular, and they're still around. Nowadays, Smith & Wesson is manufacturing this same basic type of revolver, but the materials have changed. Obviously, we've got lightweight frames, titanium cylinders, all kinds of different things. But this is the quintessential Chief Special revolver, and when they were manufactured using stainless steel, that just made them all the more popular because it didn't matter if they were carried close to the body or if they were perspired on or rained on or what have you. The magic metal would not rust or corrode in any way. So as I said, the genesis of these revolvers was in 1950 when Smith & Wesson introduced at that time a brand new frame size. It's the size we know today as the J frame. And it was introduced at the meeting of the International Association of Chiefs of Police. And there was a contest, a vote that took place there to name the new revolver, which is how it was dubbed the Chief Special. As I said, that first one was a blued steel revolver, and 15 years later, Smith & Wesson introduced the first all stainless steel revolver, and that was the Model 60. So this one was manufactured about 10 years after the line was started, but as you can see, it is still all stainless steel to include the hammer and the trigger and all of the other parts. So this was the first non-rusting, non-corroding revolver that went out onto the market. Eventually it was followed a few years later by the Model 66, which was the second all stainless steel, and that's the stainless steel version of the blued steel Model 19 Combat Magnum. And obviously the stainless steel revolvers and stainless steel firearms in general were so popular that as years went by, there were more and more and more of them offered, manufactured out of that non-rusting, non-corroding stainless steel. To paraphrase Obi-Wan, this absolutely is an elegant weapon for a more civilized age. Everything about these revolvers are beauty in their simplicity. The rear sight is a simple groove in the top strap that you see here. The front sight is integral to the barrel, and it is a serrated front sight to help keep down on glare, so that would not impair the shooter's ability to see that front sight. Even so, this was certainly never intended to be a long-range target revolver. Rather, this was for close-range defensive use, and in that capacity, they served very, very well. I know of at least one police officer who was able to save his own life with not a Model 60. He had a 637, which is the lightweight version of this same revolver, and he was able to defend himself and prevent his own murder by use of a very similar revolver. So these did serve a purpose, and they were very effective. And they're still just as effective today as they were back in the mid-decades of the 20th century. Another thing that aided the popularity of these revolvers was their ease of carry. And when we look at the weight, first off, this is still coming in at less than 20 ounces. It is 19.4 ounces on my scale here, which even by today's standards are not bad. Smith & Wesson makes similar revolvers to this these days that are several ounces lighter, but still coming in at less than 20 ounces is pretty good. I'm not sure what the overall length of these revolvers are, but I can tell you they are easy to carry, and with less than 20 ounces and a very compact overall length, even for plainclothes officers who might have opted for this over a full-size service revolver, they were able to carry this very easily, and it still hits with the authority of a full power .38 Special. Now, these were not plus P rated back in the day, and I'm probably going to fire this revolver very seldom moving into the future, if at all. Back in the day, when this was my off-duty piece, I shot it quite a bit, but I just don't feel the need to do that today. I've got more modern revolvers, more modern J-frames in fact, and I'll shoot those with the Smith & Wesson lifetime service contract, and this one I'll keep for special occasions, and who knows, maybe I'll carry it once in a while when the mood strikes me. I'm trying to get the light and the focus just right so you can see the barrel markings. Here we see the Smith & Wesson logo on the left side of the barrel, and on the right side is the entire name of the cartridge. A lot of times we hear this just referred to as the 38 Special, but the full name for this cartridge is the 38 Smith & Wesson Special that you see there, which is obviously what this little revolver is chambered for. And that really made just about the right package for a revolver of this size and weight. It does bark a little bit if you fire it with warm 38 Special loads, but they're not difficult to fire, at least for anyone who's reasonably skilled in shooting wheel guns. Some officers opted for the Colt Detective Special because it had an extra cartridge in the cylinder. Those were 6 shots, but they were also just a little bit bigger, so officers who wanted to maximize their ability to carry the most compact wheel gun out there usually opted for the Smith & Wesson J-frames, and as I said, the Model 60 was certainly one of the most popular. The Model 36 and the Model 60 are both 5-shot revolvers, as you see here. They can be fired single action, but I think most of the time these revolvers were used, they were fired double action. And the double action pull on this revolver is not extremely light, but it is very, very smooth, and you can see the timing is still very good even after all these years. The trigger has a grooved face to help improve the traction for the trigger finger. That's kind of a nice touch. And the Smith & Wesson revolvers from this era and earlier had a lot of little touches like that just to show the quality of these firearms. We've got the checkering on the hammer right there, so if someone did want to cock it, again, that helps to get a little bit better traction for your thumb. We've got the fine checkering on the cylinder release that you see here. More checkering that we see at the front of the extractor rod. This is the old style extractor star that you see there. And even the muzzle has a very nice crown. So even though, as I said, these were not target revolvers, there was still a lot of time and effort put into manufacturing them. There was a lot more hand fitting and hand work done on these revolvers. And even look at the grips. Look at this. Very, very nice wood, checkered in the center. We've got the Smith & Wesson medallions here. So just a very, very nice little revolver. Interestingly, for as many Model 60 revolvers as there were in use by law enforcement officers back in the day, you don't see these very often on the used market. I can't remember the last time I saw a Model 60 used in a gun shop somewhere, and I really don't remember seeing them very often at gun shows. I think the people that own these really tend to appreciate them for the classic firearms that they are, and I am certainly glad to have this one back, especially knowing a lot of its history. How many times have we said, I wish this firearm or that firearm could talk so it could tell us about where it had been and what it had done and everything. I know a lot of where this revolver has been and about what it has done, and I am very, very glad to have it back in my collection. And that's going to do it for my review of this classic Model 60 Chief Special revolver. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments about this video, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember to stop by my website, check out the news and information page to see all the latest things going on with me and the channel, and go by the products page because a lot of the products that I've reviewed here on the channel have links on that page, and there's information beneath some of those links that'll save you some money if you decide to make a purchase. See you next time, folks. And until then, hopefully with a classic wheel gun, good shooting. Bye-bye.